There was Neil Aycourt at the front, Gary Dobson off his left shoulder, there was Jamie off his right shoulder, 2 paces behind. And as I walked into him, Gary basically swung a tool, hit me round the back of the head. I felt something cold. My jeans were soaked in blood, my trainers were full of blood.
You actually saw Neil put the knife into you?
Yes.
And you're certain of that?
I am, yes.
Obeying the code of silence of the street, Lee refused to tell police who stabbed him. A few months later, Aycourt came after him again.
He's unzipped his jacket, pulled out a big knife.
How big?
I don't know, it must have been about this big.
So what, 2 feet?
Yeah, at least. Then he come up to me, put the knife in my chest plate, standing about 3 foot away from me. Arms reached to
He put the knife against your chest?
To my chest plate there, yeah.
Despite being prime suspects for the Lawrence murder, the Aycourts were still using knives. The year after Stephen's death, it was Jamie's turn to leave a calling card.
Jamie Aycourt tried to stab me. Whether he tried to kill me or hurt me, he knows. And he stabbed my best mate in the heart. Darren tried to come to my aid. He tried to break it up, got on his back and trying to give him a bear hug sort of thing. Jamie Aycourt was acting like a rodeo ball, trying to get Darren off him. That's what I thought, but Jamie was also stabbing Darren.
Where did he stab him?
Jamie stabbed him a few times, pierced his heart in the stomach and in the side.
They had to try and revive him, as I call, with the zappers, you know, but they didn't. And they actually literally had to open him up and hand massage his heart to keep it going once, you know, it had stopped. I just could not believe how a jury of 12 people felt that Jamie had to use a knife to defend himself against my son Darren.
Did Darren have a knife?
Darren doesn't carry knives.
Only Jamie had a knife?
Only Jamie had a knife, yes.
And he was found not guilty on the
He
grounds
was
of
found
self-defence?
not guilty, so if someone can tell me, you know, the logic of that, I'd like to know it.
The gang had a remarkable ability to escape conviction. Just 3 weeks before the Lawrence murder, local boy Stacey Bennyfield was left millimetres from death after one of the gang, David Norris, stabbed him. But amidst allegations that his father Clifford had bribed a witness and nobbled a jury member, which were later denied, Norris walked free.
They managed to get away with all of these attacks. The fall of the coin always seemed to be in the suspect's favour, but, in search of a breakthrough, detectives placed a covert camera behind a plug socket in Dobson's home, which used to be this flat just behind me here in Eltham. This provided vivid proof that the gang thought stabbing people was little more than a game.
Torture him, set him alive. I've been trusting him when he kills himself. I'll throw their 2 legs and arms on the same one and go, let him scramble the barrel, kicking the barrel around. Been bumping around like that.
And I informed him that unless by 10 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time on Tuesday.
It was the most vicious, racist material that you could ever imagine, and it was shocking. It was incredibly shocking.
You brother little
Where their form of a few weeks ago is gone.
Well, Jenny has this horrific issue with chuffed. I hate to be up here, you're second to Spurs, but what did you make of it?
Should be left with that fucking stump.
3 points. But getting 3 goals as well was just...
These must be the right people. The police are on the right path. There must be evidence that's got to be out there which supports the proposition that these individuals might be responsible.
This daring surveillance operation, run by a hard-nosed London cop, was part of a second investigation into Stephen's murder. Practising stabbing people in private, however, is not illegal. Police had to actually catch the gang doing something or hear a confession.
I had, I think, 13 observation posts watching the various suspects just to establish a pattern, to see what they were up to socially and if they were up to any criminality. In the event, the truth of it is they led a very boring life. There was very little social activity, very rarely went to the pub, and weren't at burglaring or robbing. There are other strategies that we were going to use if appropriate. Reward, immunity. We hope by seeing, visiting family and friends, turning over people here, there and everywhere, that we would keep the pressure, which would encourage a conversation.
The surveillance operation exposed the gang's appalling racism and obsession with knives, but they just didn't talk about the murder. This was remarkable, as it was such a huge event in their lives. It was now obvious that they were being schooled in anti-surveillance techniques and knew what the police could be up to.
Nosy I'm telling you. A waste of the taxpayers' money.
These were 16 and 17-year-old boys. Some of them had cautions for various things, but none of them had convictions for anything. For them to maintain the position that they did maintain, somebody probably told them how to behave.
And this somebody was undoubtedly Clifford Norris, notorious gangster and David Norris's father. Having evaded capture for drugs offences, he was known to intimidate witnesses and cast a shadow over the Lawrence case.
If there was an intimidatory influence in and around the Eltham area at that time, it was part of our job to try and take it out.
Amazed Norris had remained at large throughout the first investigation, Mellish made the gangster's arrest a priority, hoping to remove his ability to protect his son.
We hit them. There were guns everywhere. I think the mine had guns. There was guns in the car, guns in the golf bag, and there was a sawn-off shotgun and an Uzi submachine gun on one of the beds. So that was a satisfactory result. He was also wanted for, I think, half a tonne of cannabis by customs.
Clifford Norris had a number of friends in important places, and some of them in the police. One of those friends was Detective Sergeant John Davidson, who played a key role in the first Lawrence investigation. But we'll come back to him later.
We touched all the spots that were required and more. The truth is, though, we failed. We didn't get the evidence. Please God, it's still out there to be got.
The police failed to get a breakthrough, but Stephen's killers were still out there and free. So in 1995, the Lawrences took matters into their own hands and launched their own private prosecution.
This sort of prosecution I don't think has ever been done before. It's not for the legal novelty, it's simply because the family feel that they have to get justice, and this is the only way that they consider that's going to be possible.
The Lawrences' case relied heavily on the identification evidence of Stephen's friend, Dwayne Brooks.
We had, on paper at least, an eyewitness who had, in a statement, said, I saw these individuals, and in my view, that's enough.
There was a number of parades, and on those parades I picked out two of the key suspects, who obviously are now known to be Luke Knight and Neil Aycourt. Those two were at the scene. Those two took part in the attack on Steve.
So charges were brought against Neil Aycourt and Luke Knight. Gary Dobson was later added to the list. Under pressure and suffering from post-traumatic stress, Dwayne was undermined in the witness box. Even though he tried to stick by his identification evidence, the case collapsed.
Dwayne Brooks told the jury it was a racist attack. His identification evidence led to the charging of two of the three defendants. but the judge ruled that Brooks's testimony was not admissible.
We'd failed. We had failed, and failed massively. We were the lawyers, we were responsible, we were the advisors, we presented the evidence, and we had failed.
So for the Lawrences, they had their son taken away from them. The police failed them in their investigation. The CPS failed them. And eventually, the legal team.
Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as that.
There was mass outrage. Some newspapers even dared to repeatedly name names. The public were unable to understand why there were no convictions, when everybody seemed to know who'd done the murder. The clamour for justice resulted in an inquiry led by Sir William Macpherson. At last, it seemed, these men would be called to account.
People wanted to see them. They wanted to smell what those sorts of men were actually like, get a sense of what they were like. So there was very high tension at that time. And of course, when they did come in, their whole demeanour was one of arrogance and disdain. They were going to show off that they were going to get away with it.
Any hope of finding answers was shattered when the suspects obtained a High Court ruling banning questions which might implicate themselves in the murder.
They know they got away with murder, and it pains me to know that I have to sit and watch all of that, sit and watch them sitting in the inquiry, sit and watch their parents encouraging them.
Having sat there saying, meek and mild, I'm not a violent person, I'm not a racist, that sort of thing. Then when it comes to it, on the way out, they demonstrated who they really were.
The Macpherson inquiry concluded that the Met's first attempt at the murder investigation was not only incompetent, but institutionally racist.
A number of officers were criticised, but this man, Detective Sergeant John Davidson, was singled out for a stinging rebuke. He had even refused to accept that it had been a racist murder. Macpherson concluded, "The question is whether any more sinister interpretation must be placed upon his conduct other than the comment that he was the wrong person to perform the tasks allocated to him." However, at that stage, the Lawrences' persistent allegations of corruption could not be proved.
The court ruling meant that Macpherson was unable to question the suspects on their alibis. On the night of the murder, all 5 say they were at home. I wanted to challenge this, and there was one vital witness who could help me do it. Known only as Witness B, he'd spotted the gang soon after the murder. I had to track him down.
I'm just about to go and knock on his door. Now, as we know, Witness B is a crucial witness, and he saw something very, very important that night. He thinks he saw David Norris and at least one of the A Courts running away from the scene. He was cooperative with the police and with the legal team, but whether he's cooperative with us, well, that's a different question entirely. But we'll give that a go.
Not surprisingly, Witness B had moved from the area, but I found his mother miles away. She told me he wanted nothing more to do with the case.
No sooner had I left Witness B's mum's house than my mobile rang, and it was Witness B himself. And he was absolutely furious that we'd gone to his mum's house. But over a period of 10 or 15 minutes on the phone, I managed to calm him down, and he's actually agreed to meet up with me, and I'm going to meet him at 2 o'clock tomorrow.
I met Witness B, and he stuck by his story. He'd given anonymous evidence to the private prosecution, which had been discounted, but I'd a hunch his evidence hadn't been given a fair hearing. B was asked at the trial to pick out Norris from an ID parade, but his appearance had changed considerably in the years after the murder. And I've learned that Norris had got lucky with a virtual look-alike put in beside him. B picked out the wrong man, and this mistake had haunted him ever since. Over 6 months, I got to know Witness B and became convinced he was telling the truth. Eventually, I persuaded him to go on camera, but, still afraid of repercussions, it was only on the condition that we hid his face and disguised his voice.
I'm giving my version of events again. I don't know, maybe for the fact I'd like to see justice actually come, whether it was them or whether it weren't. If it ain't